G'day Dons fans and welcome back to Don the Stat. A 90-point loss to Brisbane, our 16th defeat of the season, and once again Essendon supporters are searching for reasons to stay optimistic. And in searching for it, we remember back to round 9 this season, a match where we led by more than 4 goals before letting it slip, eventually going down by just 14 points. But is there enough there to give us hope that win number 2 can come this Sunday in our annual challenge match, where footy gives way to supporting children fighting for something much more serious than a game of football? Can the Bombers produce a response, or will the Giants continue their charge towards September? I'm Jonathan Walsh, and joining me for our round 19 preview is Ian Hume. Hume, how's things, mate?
Hey there, Jono. Good to be with you this evening. Back at work for me after the school holidays, and it's been a good start. I also think it's appropriate that we're recording on the day of the release of The Odyssey, the story of a man who continually gets blown off course as he looks to return home. It does feel like Essendon's been on its own odyssey these past 20 years as we look to get back to where we want to be with the whole thing of monsters and self-inflicted wounds and, going off track and changing track multiple times. It does feel like an apt description of the sort of thing that's been happening as Essendon fans for these past 20 years.
Yeah, speaking of things not coming home today, mate, hello to all the English football or soccer fans out there. It's not necessarily number one supporter of Argentina, but anyone but England, I guess, and nice to see that result happen this morning.
Yeah, it certainly was good to see them get their hopes up, only for them to be dashed once again. A bit of schadenfreude for us as Essendon fans there. Before we get into tonight's episode, I do want to have a big thank you to Rick Edwards for jumping on with me earlier this week, talking through his top 20 draft rankings for July. A lot of great work that Rick does, getting to all these under 18 games and getting a really good sense of the players that are available. And as Essendon fans, given what else has gone on this year, the draft certainly is a big focus for us. So it was great to pick Rick's brain about the talent that's out there. I do also want to say thank you to my friend Trent for the posters that you can see behind me. If you are watching the video, you felt that my walls were looking a little bit bare here in the garage. I do want to note that the 93 poster has a tendency to come off the wall and curl up in a ball, pretty reminiscent of Essendon fans this year and what we've often wanted to do during games. So hopefully it manages to stick there for the rest of the evening.
No, looking sharp, mate. It's certainly spruced the place up a little bit. I only had a quick listen to your show with Rick. I'll skim through it pretty quickly on 2x speed today on the way to the office, but I've banked that up for a second listen on the weekend. And I love getting Rick's insights into the draft pool talent. He's got a great eye for young talent. He spent a lot of time out watching games and watching the footage that he records himself back as well. So I'll dig into that over the weekend, and then I'm sure we'll touch on it in a bit more detail next week. But before we look to the draft, shall we take a look back at the Brisbane game and, as we like to say, rip the Band-Aid off?
Yeah, indeed. And it's one of those things where we ripped the Band-Aid off so much on these games. There's not much skin left and you're pulling a lot of hair off your arms and your legs. And we're a bit raw at the moment as Essendon fans. And certainly after this week's game just gone, it certainly wasn't a fun performance to sit through. It really was one of those games where everything that could go wrong did go wrong, at least for the first 3 quarters. We got belted in the contest, we lost territory, and then, if we did win the ball back in Brisbane's forward 50, we couldn't move the ball down the field, and we didn't win it back. So I actually felt that for the first sort of half of the first quarter, we actually held up pretty well, even though the Lions were certainly dominant around the ground. But once that damn wall broke, it really was a procession. It felt like we couldn't do anything right, and that's probably down to equal parts how good Brisbane were and how dispirited we are as a team right now.
Yeah, it's a good point, mate. I was having a look at some of the numbers in preparing for the show, and it sort of smacked me in the face that the average games experience for Brisbane was 150.7. We were down at 79. So, 80 games more experience 70 games more games per experience per player is, the equivalent of 3 and a bit seasons. So it's pretty telling. And I guess we needed a lot to go right to be competitive in this game, and we needed to start well. We haven't started well really at all this season. And then we conceded the first centre clearance. They scored from it 18 seconds into the game. Thankfully for us, that it was a behind, but it was pretty ominous right from the start. And then in preview, we also spoke about shutting down Charlie Cameron, great player, of course, but also a real barometer and someone that really gets their crowd going. And the value of silencing the crowd when you play interstate is pretty important. And then he intercepts, comes from nowhere really, intercepts and kicked their first goal of the match. So yeah, it was a case, as you said, everything that could go wrong, really did. And you're right, we did defend bravely for half the quarter. I remember sitting there sort of halfway through that first quarter thinking, well, how have they only scored 10 points? It was, one goal for. So missing shots was part of the answer to that. But yeah, it felt for all of the dominance and territory that they had. They intercepted us 6 times in our defensive half of the ground. Yeah, we were hanging on for dear life, and then the damn wall did open. They kicked 4-2 to 3 behinds after that in the first quarter, and a goal came from a kick in and a centre bounce. So yeah, they controlled the inside and the outside, and yeah, the game was unfortunately pretty much done at quarter time.
Yeah, indeed. And I don't think we're going to dig too deeply into the second and third quarters because what you spoke about there in the first quarter really played out across the remaining 2 quarters and ultimately saw us down by nearly 100 points at the end of the third quarter. But, in your first thoughts that you recorded post game, you actually spoke positively about what you saw with the way we were trying to defend. Now, obviously, that might be a bit of an oxymoron when you're down by 100 points in the first 3 quarters. But there were some things that we were doing that you think in the long run are going to have a positive impact on what we're actually able to achieve. Obviously, it didn't really produce results in the game, but I guess just sort of for the wider audience beyond the Patreon, what were the things that you noticed and why were you so keen on them?
Yeah, I've been called more worse things than an oxymoron lately, so I'll take that on the chin. But yeah, look, I think there's some moments in the St Kilda game where I noticed this as well, but it was a lot more evident against Brisbane. And the main one was just our want to come forward at the ball carrier and try and interrupt the way that they were moving the footy. And the best example to give a visual, and we haven't done footage for it this week, but is the one of Harry Jones in the first quarter. So if you can remember him making the tackle on Jared Berry and not quite sticking it, and Berry getting free at the last second, and then being able to get the ball forward over to Harry Jones's direct opponent, and then they basically had an extra man ahead of the footy and were able to go forward and kick a goal. That was a really good example of what I'm talking about. So I think in the past we've been quite man-on-man focused and stay with your opponent and kind of protecting our own patch rather than sort of team-focused defence. And I think there's been a shift to closing the space in front of the ball carrier rather than retreating back. And I just saw it too many times on Sunday where an Essendon player would leave their opponent to come up at the ball carrier and close that space to then force the player with the ball to have to make a decision. And it was too regular and too much of a change for me not to be an instruction. And I think it's actually pretty brave coaching. I've talked already about the average age experience differential, the fact that they've won two flags in a row, back in form and on their home deck. I think it's really brave coaching from Solly to sort of instruct his players to not take the risk, but to invite the chance that if they make a mistake, if their timing's off or they miss the tackle or don't quite stick it, like in Jones's case, that it's going to almost certainly end in an opposition scoring shot. It's probably expected that things are going to get worse before they get better by doing that. And look, I'm not necessarily casting a view on what's right or wrong. I think coaching a young group that isn't winning a lot of games and what that means for their confidence is a really tough challenge. And I think under Brad Scott, there was probably a bit of an element of, I don't think self-preservation is the right term for it. It wasn't Brad Scott trying to preserve himself, but I think probably protect the group a little bit in terms of margin, not necessarily in terms of win-loss, but definitely in terms of, not losing games by big margins where we were getting whacked. Whereas I think under Dean Solomon, we're seeing a bit more of a longer team view, even if it means we're going to cop some real whackings along the way. But to sort of shift the way that we're defending the ground towards a way that's we see the best teams do, and that's ultimately, rather than retreating, just get up and try and intercept and interrupt the opposition and force them to have to make decisions under pressure rather than allowing them to sort of come at you.
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that just takes time. It's one of those things that can look really bad for a long period of time, and then suddenly it all just clicks, or it clicks for a significant period of a game, and it's part of just the players getting comfortable with trying to play that way, comfortable with knowing when it's the right time to to leave their man and push up, and when you can trust your teammate to do that thing. And it's one of the things we've spoken about for a while, and we're going to speak a little about later. In fact, we haven't had that cohesion and those players playing together for a long period of time. Those sort of defensive structures really come to the fore when you have played together for a significant period of time. So again, we're going to have a new coaching structure come in next year. Whether that's how they want to defend the ground will be interesting to see. But if that's the way they want to play, we're getting a little bit of a head start the back end of this year with Solomon in charge there. Just on Solomon, he did get a bit of criticism for talking about a player's execution during the match and in his post-match. But watching live, and something you always like to say is that you trust your eye and then move on to using the stats to sort of justify what you've seen. I felt that was the primary issue for us. We kept missing kicks and handballs. We turned the ball back over the lines, and we're really punished from there. And it was the turnovers in our back half that really hurt us. Overall, we gave up 73 points from turnover, which is already quite high, but 51 of those points came from turnovers in our defensive half. And when you turn the ball over, it wasn't even close to halfway. Most of them were sort of just outside the 50 as well. It's the third time this season we've given up more than 50 points from turnover in the forward half, or the forward half of the opposition, after the Port and the Collingwood games. And it's pretty hard to be in games when you're giving up so much ball in your back half and you're coming up against an opposition that is so good at hurting you for it. Yeah, for me, execution was the biggest issue for us, outside of not being able to win the contest.
Yeah, so much happened particularly in that first quarter that just conspired to the result. I think Solly's right, and I don't think it's all on the ball user. I think at times it is, but sometimes it's about what's happening up the ground as well. I think in that first quarter alone, we saw Jones, collect the ball and then look boundary side down the line and then turn back inboard and handball to, I think, Roberts from memory and put Roberts under pressure. And then it ended up being a hat kick out of there. So it looked to me that, you couldn't see that on the broadcast, but that's a telltale sign to me that Jones looked down the line and there was no one presenting. We saw extra handballs when they weren't needed. I think we saw Roberts and Pryor in one chain bounce the ball when they'd only taken 2 steps and didn't need to and invited more pressure. So I didn't catch Solly's comments about it specifically, but yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But I do think the other thing that we did, particularly in that first quarter, and again, I don't know if this was coaching or just players getting sucked up the ground, is we did have extra numbers, in our defensive 50 helping to defend, and maybe this was just a byproduct of the ball spending so much time there, but we saw half forwards, Parrish and Perkins and the like in our defensive 50, which means, of course, we had extra numbers to win the ball back. But then when we did win it back, we were giving it back to them because we were exiting 50 or our defensive 50 to their outnumber.
You're right there, and you bring up half forwards and how important they are in the modern game, and it's something we've spoken about a fair bit. I think the comparison in the output of the half forwards from the two sides was fairly telling, partly about where the game was played, but also the quality of those players. And on one hand, you have Bailey and Rayner. For the Lions, they had 46 touches and 25 score involvements between them, and they did push up into the midfield, but they're predominantly starting as half forwards. And at our end, we had players like Perkins and Archie Wicks, who between them, they're playing a similar role or up the half forward that Bailey and Rayner were. The Essendon pair had 21 disposals and 5 score involvements between them. And I know, as I said, the ball was down the Lions end for much of the game, and that does skew the numbers in favour of Bailey and Rayner a little bit. But we do need to get more of output from our half forwards. And that's me speaking as someone who is a fan of both Perkins and Archie Wicks and can see them, contributing to the side, for years to come. But we need to get more value out of what our half forwards are producing, because it is such a crucial role in the modern AFL.
Yeah, I mean, Rayner and Bailey, Cam Rayner was playing game 184, Bailey game 182. And so they're seasoned pros now and have been doing this for a long, long time. Wicks is just in his second season. And, I think we're probably right to expect a little bit more of Perkins at game 114-ish. But yeah, we lost clearance by 14, most of which was centre clearance, which we lost by 11. We lost first possession at clearance by 14. We lost contested ball by 17. Inside 50s, we lost by 30. And we turned it over 23 times in our back half. So not a great day to be an Essendon forward. But all of that said, it's an area of desperate need on our list, and it is probably the hardest position to play in footy. You have to be able to run like a midfielder. Bailey and Rayner were, I mean, they're midfielders in most other teams in the competition, but because Brisbane's midfield bats so deep and they're such a team first organisation, that then they accept roles in the forward line and play them really well, and then get up the ground. You have to be able to defend like your life depends on it. You have to be able to go into stoppage and be comfortable there. You have to be able to move from defence to attack and then back again instinctively. Turnovers are happening so fast in a game of footy these days. So I think it's probably, I mean, there's class gaps all across the field when you compare a team that's won the last two flags to the team who's been stuck down the bottom now for a couple of years in a row. But yeah, it is probably the greatest example of the class gap between Essendon and Brisbane, I think.
Yeah. Just moving on to what ended up being the biggest positive of the match for the Bombers in the last quarter. I guess the overall question is, given the state of the match going into that quarter, do we take anything out of that, really? It was our highest scoring quarter for the year. We kicked 7 goals, although we still allowed the Lions to kick 6 themselves. So it was a bit of a shootout there. I think just digging deeper into that quarter, there were some interesting numbers. So we lost clearances 13-6 in that quarter, and that's usually a sign of us getting belted. If we've lost clearance this year, if we haven't been at least matching a team in clearance, we haven't been competitive. But at least in this quarter, we were competitive despite the losses at clearance. But I think the big thing out of that was that once it was outside the clearance, when the ball was getting into contested situations post clearance, we were actually doing quite well. So overall, we won contested possession by 5 in that quarter, which, given how much we were losing clearance by, suggests that once the ball did get out to those post-clearance situations, we were doing quite well there. We also had a kick-to-handball ratio of 2, which meant we were kicking twice as many times as we were handballing, compared to 1.27 up to that point. I guess that latter part especially, it's not something we've done a lot of this year. We've had to handball quite a lot, and not necessarily handball that's getting us anywhere forward like a lot of other teams are playing this year. I guess using that as a blueprint potentially of really trying to kick more, is that something we should consider for the rest of the season, even if that does go against the trend of what sides are doing this year?
To answer your first question, mate, I think, do we take anything out of it? Yeah, I mean, it was 16 goals to 1 at three-quarter time. So I think we take a lot out of it. You walk off the field at least, not feeling good about yourself, but feeling like, potentially we got a little bit out of the game, and we didn't completely, throw it in. I made the comment in First Thoughts, but also in Patreon chat. I really do marvel at the resilience of this young group and their ability to keep coming back and fighting, games out. The result's done. We're 95 points down at three-quarter time. We've got no right to be in that game. Whether Brisbane, or not be in the game, to come out and do what we did in the last quarter, whether Brisbane take the foot off the throat and cruise or not, which they're entitled to do. So often in games you see it go the other way as well, where teams are getting well beaten and they wave the white flag and completely throw in the towel. And this is also a team that's not just 95 points down at three-quarter time. We've won one game out of 15 going into this season, or out of 16, and lost the last 8 or 9 the year before. So the ability of this young group to pull themselves up and regroup and go out there and show a little bit of spirit in the last quarter. Yeah, I'm not sure I can do that. I think it was really pleasing to see that, not excusing or moving past what happened in the first 3 quarters, but I'd rather see that than see us lose by 140 or 150 points. I'm not sure how much of it was a change in ball movement philosophy. I think we did win a bit more contest in the first half of the quarter and a bit more clearance that allowed us to get territory. We moved Andy McGrath forward, which gave us an extra small forward and a bit more pressure in the forward line. We kicked 4 goals from forward half turnovers. So I think part of the reason we were kicking more is because we were winning the ball back closer to our forward line and then kicking the ball back in and having shots at goals. So, anytime you can defend the ground closer to your own goal, you're going to have a better outcome than when you're trying to do what we did in the first quarter, and that was defend from the last line of defence. So, yeah, I think there were some pleasing signs in that last quarter, and hope that the lesson out of it is that, let's be a little bit braver with ball in hand and take it on and see what we can do.
Yeah, indeed. And just on the resilience part of what you've talked about with regards to players, Swamp on X posted earlier that the only team that's won more final quarters this year is Geelong. So you're right. So obviously there's not a lot going right for Essendon, and it'd be very easy for them to drop away and not play out games. But I choose to read positive things into the fact that we are winning last quarters. Hopefully the new fitness staff is playing a part in that as well, and just the players just having a little bit of pride in their performance and trying not to get overrun and just give up, which again hopefully is something that can be built on for the future. Just finally on the Brisbane game before we move off it, another thing that we saw in that last quarter was the magnets being thrown around. You mentioned Andy McGrath going forward, and probably the highlight of that in the final quarter was seeing Nate Caddy go into the midfield at centre bounce, the highlight of which was I think he won the centre clearance and kicked it forward and ultimately ended up with the ball and kicked a goal, which is pretty impressive in its own right. Do we think that's just a meme of just saying because it was the match was long gone, or do you think there's a legitimate thing that you could pull in the future of throwing Nate Caddy forward into the midfield?
I just had a quick look, Hume. We've already won, for what it's worth, the same number of last quarters as we did for all of last season. So yeah, I guess it doesn't mean a lot, but yeah, look, I think it's a legit tactic. I mean, we've always known that he's agile and he's powerful and he's a good field kick, isn't he? So he's really dangerous when he gets the ball up the ground. I don't think you want to overcook the goose here. I think you do it when you need to get him into the game. If he's been quiet and you want to, give him a bit of a run around and have him feel his hands on the footy, or we need to give the opposition something else to think about and potentially break the game open. But I don't think it's something that you want to see every quarter, every game. I think you want to do it because it can be unpredictable, but you only get away with that if you're only doing it every so often.
Yeah. Moving on from the Brisbane game to an extent, we are moving into another Damien Barrett Award nomination, and joining the man himself and Tom Morris as two-time nominees for the year is Nick Riewoldt. Mentioned it earlier that Dean Solomon was interviewed at halftime on the coverage about what was going wrong, and he spoke about the poor execution of the team as being the reason we're well down at halftime. Riewoldt took the opportunity on Agenda Setters to criticise what Dean had said and said that our problems in this game were more about planning, system and effort, which I think is a reasonable claim to make. The problem for Nick was he then proceeded to show 3 clips to support his case. Unfortunately for Nick, all the clips he showed indicated poor execution of skills that resulted in turnovers. So I'm not sure if Nick was stitched up by his producers, but at least for what Nick was demonstrating, I think Solly had the right of it, and Nick was made to look a bit of a fool there.
Yeah, every now and then, mate, I get lost for words, and this is one of those times. I've said this before, but I think footy media does a real disservice to, not all, but a large portion of it does a real disservice to, fans of the game. I think if you're going to proclaim to be analysing, then you should do the analysis, whether he's stitched up by his producers or not. And in this case, it would appear that he came up with a point and that he wanted to make and wasn't prepared to do the work to find evidence to support it. And I think that's unfortunately all too typical of what we see in the media and why people are turning away from traditional media streams towards other things to get their fix of more learned content. So yeah, welcome to the 2 nomination club, Nick Riewoldt.
Yes, and I'm sure there'll be more people joining him in that prestigious club as the year progresses. Moving on, we probably have come to the best news to come out of Essendon all season, with Nate Caddy committing to the club for a further 3 years from his existing contract, so tying into the club until 2031, which would be his free agency year. It's the sort of contract that really sends a message to both the rest of the playing group and the competition that he at the very least sees his medium-term future at Essendon, and he's doing it because he believes there's a pathway to success there. He, as an individual, has really shown great progression this year. His ability to get opportunities at goal. Obviously, we've got question marks over his ability to execute those, but you miss 100% of the shots you don't take or 100% of the shots that you don't get. I mean, he's putting himself in the position to be getting shots on goal. So it's just the next step to clean that up. But now really it is up to he's put a lot of faith in the club. It's up to the club to really put in place the coaching structure and the teammates to support him so we can get the best out of him, because I do think the sky's the limit for Nate. We've talked about the lack of players with superstar potential on our list. He certainly is probably the prime example of a player with superstar potential. And all premiership teams really need those superstar level players to be competitive at the pointy end of the competition. And look, if in 5 years we're in a similar spot to where we are now, Would have given a lot to this club, and I think if we haven't really moved anywhere as a club in those 5 years, I certainly wouldn't begrudge him looking elsewhere. So while this is a great sign of commitment in the club, it's also a big wake-up call for the club that they've got to get a wriggle on in terms of putting in place a system that's going to develop into long-term success.
Yeah, I mean, well said, mate. He's had the 10th most shots at goal of any player this season, which, given he's in his third season, is a pretty big feather in his cap. I think there's a little bit of redemption in this too for lots of reasons and for lots of people. And I think one of those is actually Brad Scott. I think it's the news has now been broken that Nate actually approached Brad a couple of months ago saying that he wanted to re-sign, recommit, extend his contract and be the driving force behind where we're going as a club. And I think that's an endorsement of Brad and the culture that he was building in and around this younger group of players. I don't think I don't subscribe to the theory of the club being broken and it all being doom and gloom. A lot to do. Of course, lots of things to fix and improve, but I think we've also come a long way. And I think Nate's ability to develop year on year, to be where he is as a third year key forward, having done what he's done and had the 10th most scoring shots in the competition is a pretty good insight on what Nate is like as a player and a professional, but also in the improved ability to develop and grow our young talent. And I think I know it's a real focus of our list management team around building culture in the players that we bring into the club and how we assess talent. And we're not just looking at football talent, which of course Nate clearly has a lot of, but we're also looking at their values and their behaviours, their attitude, and what it's going to take to help take our club forward. And I think if you think of the fact that there's 20 players on our list right now that we've drafted since the minute that we including Nate, but the minute we called him out on draft night and since then, assuming the bulk of them are all on our list in the 2028 season, in 2 more drafts, national drafts time, and there'll be a few that churn, of course, but we'll end up with the best part of 30 players on our list, 3/4 of our list that we would have drafted over 4 to 5 years to come through together, but also players that we've selected because they have those attributes around values and culture and behaviour and leadership to help drive the club forward. So I think, we clearly identified that you couldn't really teach old dogs new tricks. I think we tried that in the first couple of years under Brad Scott. Didn't work. We started to move players on and let guys go or move them off to other clubs and invest in the draft and bring guys on that had the attributes that we wanted and needed to build a successful football club. And we've been doing it from the ground up. And I think that the mindset and attitude of these young blokes is first class. And everyone I speak to at the club tells me about how different they are, how invested they are. But yeah, as you touched on now, it's on the club to get the coaching group around them right so that we can maximise their talents.
Yes, and that brings us on to our next topic, which is the progression of the coaching process, and it does seem to be moving into gear now. James Hird has had an initial conversation with the club. It sounds like Mark McVeigh will do the same early next week, and I don't want to go into the merits of either of those candidates, but I do want to talk about the fact that, at least at this stage, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of other interests, at least compared to, say, the Carlton Tasmania jobs. Tasmania has obviously limited themselves to people who've coached previously, but those people who are going for the Tasmanian job don't seem to have a whole lot of interest at this stage in the Essendon job. And we've seen, a range of assistant coaches connected with Carlton that haven't necessarily been linked to the Essendon job. So I guess, based on the available information, have we been limited in who we can choose from due to the nature of the outside noise around the coaching choice? That has to be a quote unquote Essendon person. And I think that's been a real media narrative driven by people talking and, not necessarily the board talking. I think the board has kept a pretty tight ship in terms of what they've talked about. They've done the media release, but other than that, they haven't really been speaking a whole lot about what they're trying to do in terms of the process. But, vacuums lead to people trying to fill them, and it has led to a media narrative developing that's been allowed to spread. And it does seem to potentially be impacting on potential candidates and their reluctance to potentially go for the job. So I guess have we, by trying to keep things in-house, have we really let those outside forces define and unfortunately limit our coaching pool?
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to know. It's hard to speak for other people and their motivations. So I'm not too sure, mate. I think that the herd noise and hysteria at the start, and that's come from all areas. It's come from Hurdy himself, but that's hard to avoid. He's in the media. And he's going to be asked, and maybe it would have been easier if he had have just played a straight bat, but he took the opportunity to use his platform to audition basically, and I get why he would have done that, and and then there's still a lot of fans that are right in his corner as well, and I understand that as well, but what I do know is that the club is really confident in the pool of candidates that they've got. I'm told that there's more interest than what's being reported. And this bit I don't know, but I suspect part of the conversations that we're having with coaches is that we would want it not to be played out through the media, and we'd prefer it to be kept behind closed doors. And I think part of assessing the values of a potential coach is how they handle themselves in that situation and the questions that come, and are they prepared to follow the process and not allow it to be played out through the media. And I also can understand why the club would have decided not to respond to stories that are out in the media and correct things that aren't accurate, because I think if you start doing that, then that becomes the story, and then you end up just chasing narratives and trying to change them, and they keep getting ahead of you, and you spend more time as a club working on putting out fires and changing false narratives or correcting them than you do actually doing the work that needs to be done, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I'm confident that it's going to be a well coordinated process. I think it'll be largely confidential. I think there'll be a lot that we don't know about. I think there's more candidates being spoken to than what's being reported. In fact, I know that there is. I don't know who they are. I haven't asked who they are. And quite frankly, if I did ask and I was told, I'd be disappointed, because I don't think that those things should be talked about. And that seems to me to be very much the point. So, and the way that we're conducting ourselves. And I quite like that. I can get why that's scary and unnerving for fans. And I think not knowing is almost what's going on is almost the hardest part as a fan at the moment. But I think we need to give the decision makers the space to do this thoroughly and properly, and I think that's very much what they're doing, and I'm pretty confident in the people that we've got making the decision that we'll get the right outcome.
Me too. Well, look, given the nature of the season and the fact that we're getting belted, and that's not fun to talk about, and we're playing games where we expecting to lose, and that's not fun to preview. We've opened the floor to Patreon questions throughout the rest of the year, and we're going to address one here from Patreon. Lee's quite a good big contributor on the Patreon chat. So he actually was inspired by the game we just played and decided to go back and look at when Brisbane's last 90-plus point loss was, and it was all the way back in round 4 of 2018 against Richmond. So right when Brisbane was starting their ascent and coming up against a side like Richmond, which were, they're coming off the back of a premiership. So hopefully there's some parallels there for Essendon. But given that the Lions have gone nearly 8 full years without being beaten by what we were beaten on the weekend, and there's still 9 players from that side that played for Brisbane in that game that they were playing on the previous weekend. So that was Bailey, Rayner, Berry, McCluggage, Hipwood, Gardner, Andrews, Cameron, and Zorko. So, even though they were getting belted, that they had the basis of what a successful team was going to be.
Yeah, it's a good find by Lee. Really well done. You mentioned Rayner and Bailey, the impact they had on the game on the weekend, and that was game 182 and 184 for them. So the match that Lee's found here in 2018 was Zach Bailey's first game and Cam Rayner's fourth. And just on the subject of experience and continuity, Brisbane's third least experienced player on the weekend was Levi Ashcroft, who's only a young player, but it was his 44th game. He hasn't missed a game basically since he's come in. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 players on Sunday who have played fewer games than Levi Ashcroft. So yeah, it's a pretty remarkable difference in player continuity between Brisbane and Essendon at the moment.
Yeah, and as you sort of said, that really sort of flows on into the results. And Lee's question, building on from that, was how long do you think it takes for a team to be able to play together before they can be fully cohesive? And you mentioned there, with the amount of players that have played less games than Levi Ashcroft, who's only a couple of seasons into his career, it's the fact that we haven't been able to have a consistent lineup where players of that age group have been able to get consistent games into them and playing together. So I guess in your view, how long do we need a group of players to play together before we see consistent results?
It was also Chris Fagan's 26th game as coach, by the way, too. So they've had continuity through coaching as well. But I wish I had the data. I had some data presented to me at the start of the season around continuity in 2025. So it was a measure of the number of games and time on ground that players across the competition had spent together and played together at senior level. And it pretty much mirrored ladder position in 2025. It's as strong an indicator as you got of any metric on win-loss. And it makes sense why the more that the players have played together, the more they, the more seasoned they are, the more experienced they are, the more they've encountered particular situations, the more trust they have. Harry Jones knows that if he turns to boundary side, that he's going to have an option to kick to down the line. Archie Roberts knows he doesn't have to take that bounce. He's going to have a target in a particular spot. We've had none of that. And like Lee's done here, Brisbane tends to be an example that we get compared to a fair bit in terms of their rebuild and how they've gone about it and how long it took them under Chris Fagan to get to where they are now. And the example I come back to is Fremantle. They won 15 games in 2015. They turned over, for all intents and purposes, they looked like they were on their way to move up the ladder and have some success. But at the end of that 2015 season, they turned over 10 players, which is a pretty big outgoing for a team that had won 15 players. They lost experience in doing so, Crowley, McFarlane, Duffield. And then in 2016, they dropped all the way back to just 4 wins. And then the next 2 years, they had 8 and 8 with percentages below 75. And then the 2 years that followed that was 9 wins and 7 wins before winning 15 games in 2022. But what they did in those years between was they got a lot of games into core players that they drafted from 2016 onwards. And they got to the end of the 2022 season, and these guys had started to play, anywhere from 30, 50, 60 up to 100 games. And all of that was together, so building real continuity. But again, they had another turnover of players at the end of that year for various reasons. They lost Mundy to retirement. Akers moved to Carlton, Lobb to the Bulldogs, Collier retired, Tucker and Logue took the cash to go to North Melbourne, and their continuity went backwards. The year later, they lost Schultz. So they turned over a big chunk of their more sort of senior players and then had to go backwards again before they could go forwards. They won 10 games and 12 games in the next 2 years. So they're still okay. But then you fast forward to round 1 this year, and that group that they played 30 to 100 games in 2022. We're now up to, anywhere from 150 to 160, 170 games. And then the guys that they drafted and bought in to replace the Crowley and McFarlane and Duffield and Mundy and Akers and these guys that moved on are guys like Tracy and Young, Chapman, Amiss, Walker, Johnson, etc. And they filled that vacuum at the end of 2022. They went backwards because of it. And now all up that, they're up to 50, 80, 90 games in some cases, and that continuity is back, and we're seeing what we're seeing this year. And I sort of think we, at the end of the 2023 season, we didn't win 15 games, but we were in the top 4 for a large chunk of the first 2/3 of the season, but we weren't quite good enough. And then we turned over a whole bunch of players. We've gone backwards. I think that how far we've gone backwards has got worse because of injury, but I also think it was no one plans to lose games of footy, but it was a planned exercise. We knew we needed to bring more talent in and bring them through together. And I think that's what we're doing. And yeah, I think that trust only comes through continuity and games together, and we're probably still a couple of years away of hopefully getting more wins on the board. But I expect the next couple of years to be a bit more like the 2 seasons Fremantle had in sort of 24, 25 before we can go forward again and start to have, what they call in American sports a winning season and win more games than we lose and push up to the higher parts of the ladder.
Yeah, it's probably a 5 or 6 year period where if you can get those players coming through together and getting to those 100, 150 game marks, which you sort of talked about with that first group of Freo players in the post sort of 2015 era for them, before you start to really see the results there. I guess this is an extension of Lee's question. Can you see 9 players that ran out for us on the weekend that you think would be a big part of our side 8 seasons from now, and are getting up to those games played that the Brisbane players are out?
Yeah, actually, really quickly, mate. I didn't have to think too hard about this at all. I'm really confident in the young group that we've got together. So, Roby, Sharp, Farrow, Kako, Caddy, Durham, Reed, Clark, Roberts are your nine, and I think they've all got bright futures. I think Caldwell and Dersma are still young enough to be there in 8 years' time and playing good footy. I think Caldwell could go either way from here. He can be what he is now, which is an okay mid, but kind of you know fourth, fifth mid in the rotation, or he could be better than that if his body truly gets right. We've seen some good footy from him in the past. And then Dersma, I think, guys will go past him, but he'll continue to be a really important role player in a pretty difficult role out on the wing. We probably need to see more of Kondo Giardis and Day Wicks and also Nick Bryan. They clearly have talent, but whether that's talent that's going to see them play a key role in 8 years, I'm not so sure. Archer May didn't play on the weekend, but he's another one that's probably in that bracket. I'm really confident in Hayes that he's got a bright future, even though we've only seen him for half a game of senior footy. But I think he could be there as well. And then the other one is obviously Nick Martin, who I think is probably our best player on the list come next season, and looking forward to him coming back. So I think we've got 9, 10, 11, 12 of the pieces there, and we've got a really good draft hand this year to bring more talent in, and then we know we've got an NGA father-son talent early in the draft the year after to bring in as well. So plenty of depth in young talent. More's going to come. I think that's all on the right track. And as we said later, we've just got to put the coaching group around them now to bring the best out of them. But we'll get rid of the crystal ball and let's look at what's happening here and now, mate, and have a look at the Giants.
Yeah, let's. So at the Giants following their win over Essendon in round 9, the Giants sat in 13th position with 4 wins and a percentage of 91.1%. In the week since, they've won 4 and lost 4 with victories over Brisbane, Melbourne, Fremantle and Geelong, whilst their losses have come against West Coast, St Kilda, Carlton and Hawthorn. So currently they sit in 11th position with 8 wins and a percentage of 101.6.
Yeah, they're coming off back-to-back wins against Freo and Geelong. Both of those games are at home, although the Freo game is at Canberra, where they've got a pretty good record. But they were coming off 3 losses before that. So, it's been a little bit of a weird period for them over the last 5 weeks.
Indeed. I guess statistical-wise, since they've played us, there's a couple of things that stand out. They've actually, in the 8 weeks or the 8 games since they've played us, they've gone to being one of the most efficient teams in the comp in terms of their scoring efficiency going forward. So 49% up to playing us in round 9 in terms of scores per forward 50 or forward entries. Well, that's increased to 55% in the 8 weeks since. Also improved defensively in this time. They're already pretty good. They're only conceding a score on 46% of entries, and that's dropped to 44% in the past 8 weeks. Another thing that really stands out about them is their contested game. They've been the number 1 overall side for contested possession in the last 8 weeks and number 2 for tackle. So they're doing a lot of work in close, and that's an area that we've struggled with this year. So it is going to be a big watch for us heading into this game.
Yeah, there's nothing particularly notable about their scoring profile over the last 5 weeks. They're just on the AFL average for scores from clearance, ranked 8th. Likewise, turnover scores, they're ranked 10th, again, bang on the AFL average. They're ranked 17th for scores against on clearance, though, and have conceded the most points from centre bounce in that time. We're ranked 7th. So one thing that has improved under Solly, we were leaking scores for fun in centre bounce. We've tightened that up, and 7th in the AFL for scores against from centre bounce is a pretty good turnaround. And then back on the Giants, teams have been able to score pretty well against them from forward half chains. They've conceded the 4th most points from chains that start in their own defensive half of the ground over the last 5 weeks, and they're ranked 14th for time in forward half across that period. Should be said, we're ranked 18th, so it's a big challenge for us too.
Yeah, I guess just on the Giants, they've been a really interesting watch this year. They've actually beaten 4 of the top 6 sides, or the current top 6 sides this season, and they're yet to play Adelaide, so essentially beaten 4 of the 5 top sides that they've played, and yet they're currently outside the top 10. There's a fair bit of Jekyll and Hyde about them, so for our sake, he's hoping we get the Hyde version of the Giants this week.
Well, arguably we did the first time we played them. They're a hard team to work out. They didn't just beat Brisbane, they beat them by 78 points. And so, Lee might not have had to have gone too far to find their last 90-point loss had the Giants scored a couple of extra goals in that one. And then they also beat Melbourne, who have been playing really good footy, by 49. So, but then either side of those 2 wins, they lost to West Coast and St Kilda, games that you would expect them to have won. So, Jekyll and Hyde's a pretty good analogy for them.
Indeed. Well, look, let's move to selection and again, a Sunday game. So we've got the joys of the extended bench and speculating on who's actually going to be in the side. A couple of players back for injury for Essendon this week with Jordan Ridley and Kyle Langford returning. Hussein Alashkar is back on the extended bench. And Jackson Artemis, our mid-season draftee that we took at pick 1, is making his debut. He is actually the 21st debutant since the start of last year. Thanks to a friend of the show, James Lowry, for pointing that out. Really excited to see what he can do. I think we've already seen from this crop of mid-season draftees that have debuted that there's a lot of talent this year. So hopefully Jackson can show what he is capable of, just as the other ones. Ridley and Langford are both named on the ground. You'd expect them to play. I really hope that Hussein Alashkar plays for a couple of reasons. One, because you and I have been talking nonstop about how we want to see a smaller forward line and something that can be a bit more chaotic and create more pressure, particularly coming up against a giant side that is so good at rebounding from the back 50. If we run a really tall forward line against them, that's going to be even easier for them, and they're very good at doing it. But also because it was clear that he was scoring goals when he was in the AFL side, but there were other aspects of his game that they expected him to work on. And you assume that would be the defensive aspects of the game. We went back on the weekend and he had 9 tackles in the VFL. And I think when you send someone back for a particular reason to work on it, and they do that and they show that at the level below, I think it's a really good message to send to the rest of the team that you reward players who do what's asked of them at the lower level with senior selection. So for a couple of reasons, I do hope Huss finds his way into the side this week.
Yeah, with you on that, mate. Good to see Jackson Artemis get his debut. Getting your head around 21 debutants in just under 2 seasons of footy is pretty hard to kind of comprehend, really. But looking forward to seeing him. He's got some real sort of swagger and attitude about the way he plays his footy. Some confidence. So I think he'll adapt well and slot in well. I think he'll be a good partner for the likes of Archie Roberts down there. And I wonder whether his inclusion is maybe a bit of a pointer that we might see Andy McGrath further up the ground this week. I really hope that we do see Huss in that side, because not only are the Giants good at intercept marking with Taylor and Himmelberg and Laverde down there, but they're also very, very good at winning defensive ground balls as well. So we need to be mindful that they're great at that. They're number 1 in the competition over the last 5 weeks for defensive ground ball wins. So we know the Orange Tsunami, which hasn't quite been there for them this year, but they can be really dangerous running the ball out. And if we allow them to win the ball at ground level without pressure, then the game's going to be really hard for us to control. So let's hope that we learn our lesson and Huss is there alongside a couple of others, and we're able to play a bit more of a front half game.
You mentioned the Orange Tsunami, and one of the key pillars of the Tsunami is Lockie Whitfield, and his name coming back into the side, which is a great in for them. They've also got Nick Madden, the ruckman, coming in with Kieran Briggs injured. Connor Stone, Max Krzyzewski, Cody Angove, and Josiah Delana are also named on the extended bench. Out goes Harvey Thomas, who is managed, Kieran Briggs, who is injured, and Phoenix Gothard, who's shown a fair bit this year. He's also out injured with a shoulder. I think Briggs is a big out for them, and it gives us a bit more of an opportunity. He was actually behind Madden at the start of the year, but particularly in the last win they had against Geelong, he was really important around the ground. And I think talented as Madden looks, it is a better matchup for Nick Bryan for the game, particularly around the ground. I think if he went up against Briggs, we'd be in a bit of trouble. But Madden gives him a bit more of an even contest there.
Yeah, keen to talk about the ruck duel in a little bit more detail in a sec. So I'll skip that one for now. I wonder whether, again, extended bench, so we don't really know, but just a couple of names guys might not know. So Cody Angrove, it was pick 24 in the 2024 draft. He played 4 games last year, hasn't been sighted at senior level this year. He's a hard running, high half forward mid with some real speed. So, I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the inclusions. Delana's a Cat B rookie off Fijian descent, so he came through as a academy player. Given that he came from a non-traditional pathway, he's got a bit of flair about his game. He's played 8 games across the last 2 seasons. He's a small forward, probably a like-for-like replacement for Phoenix Gothard. Lockie Whitfield comes in, of course. Connor Stone likely to come in as well. I think it might point a little bit to Lockie Ash. He's been sort of Hasn't played in the midfield really the last 2 weeks. He was there for a brief patch last weekend, but I wonder whether they might need him as a body through the midfield this week, and perhaps with Field and Connor Stone come back in to play that half-back role. Toby Bedford's had to play largely as a midfielder as well throughout, a lot of the second half of this season. So, Angove is kind of a sort of a version of him as a hard running half forward. So it'll be interesting to see where they land on some of those decisions.
Yeah, well, let's get to the match. And I sort of stole your thunder a little bit with the thing you wanted to talk about in this next topic. So I will let you get to it and clear the floor. But, mentioned when we were talking about the Giants have been one of the best teams in the contest these past 9 weeks. Well, unfortunately, we've been one of the worst. And if we can't improve on that, we aren't going to be competitive. So how do we change that this week?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We've talked about contest a lot. Dean Solomon talks about it a lot. So if it was only a case of talking about it and that being enough to get the job done, then we'd be getting better outcomes. And unfortunately, it's not quite as simple. But a lot of people had written off Kieran Briggs. I think they saw him as an old school ruck and probably thought that the new rules had made it hard for people like him or players like him. But he got himself into some really, really good form. And I think he's proved that there is still a role for the more old school ruck, as long as they can cover the ground, which Briggs can. He had 9 first possessions on the weekend and 5 clearances against the Cats, and only Oliver had more for the Giants. So he was their second highest rated player on the ground. And in fact, if you look at all rucks this year that have played 10 or more games, he's the 6th highest rated ruckman in the competition. So he's been playing some good footy. Madden is a very different profile of ruck. He's the type that I think most thought, a Blackiston type would be able to take a real advantage of the new rules. He's athletic, he jumps, he can cover the ground, but what he hasn't shown just yet is that he can give the Giants the contest grunt work that they get from Briggs. Madden has a higher hit-out win percentage, as you'd expect with that leap. He wins 51% of his ruck contests at senior level this year compared to just 41% for Briggs. But despite that, Briggs gets more hit-outs to advantage. So he's winning less hit-outs, but he's more of his hits are still going to the advantage of his mids. He wins twice as many clearances, or almost. It's 4.1 to Briggs, 2.3 to Madden, and then 2.4 more first possessions, 5.4 to Briggs, 3 to Madden. So I think that's a big out and a bit of advantage for us if Nick Bryan can take advantage. I think we've seen him probably drop off a little bit in recent weeks, which is understandable given he hasn't played a lot of senior footy, 30-odd games. He's back from an ACL injury. It's his first time as the number one ruck and leading a ruck division. So it's understandable that he'll have some ups and downs. But if I was Dean Solomon this week, I'd be starting with Nick Bryan and really challenging him, make mention of the fact that he was well beaten last week and really put it on him to respond this week against a ruck who is still only 22, only played 6 senior games, and challenge him to be physical and give us a real contest around the footy. And then the other area is obviously Clayton Oliver. I'd like to see Sam Durham and Sullivan Roby take turns to rotate on that matchup, body him, beat him to the footy, use their frame, use their physicality, which they can both do, but also take him forward. Oliver holds the keys to their midfield. He gets near on double the contested possessions of anyone else for the Giants that's playing this week. He averages 15.5 a game. Toby Green's 9.4, Finn Callahan 8.7, and then nearly twice as many clearances as anyone else as well. So he's the key. Finn is a very, very good player, inside out player. Does he the most damage on the outside, but he needs Oliver to play well for him to be his best. So I think stop them at the source. The other thing with Oliver is he doesn't do a lot of defensive running. So I think Does and Roby have the opportunity to expose him there by using their attributes to get forward and potentially hit the scoreboard as well, get him overhead too. So yeah, I think fight fire with fire a little bit rather than going an all-out tag or defensive mid, someone who can beat him to the footy and out-contest him. Big challenge for young Sullivan, but then also a couple of guys there that can expose him by getting forward and using their sort of power attributes against him.
Yeah, and then speaking of us getting forward and looking at what the Giants' defence can put up, they've conceded quite a lot of inside 50s, and I think that's been typical of them over the past few years. They have been one of those teams that does like to play from the back, hence the Orange Tsunami, but this season, it's really held up well in denying opposition scores despite the weight of entries they've been conceding. I guess what can we do differently to provide a scoreboard threat this week?
Yeah, it's a good question. They're great in the air. The names we mentioned earlier. Taylor in particular, but Himmelberg and Laverde as well, and great on ground. As I said, they've averaged the most defensive 50 ground balls in the comp. So I think Huss, for me, has to play. For the reasons you said before, gone back, worked on his game, 9 tackles in the VFL, reward for effort. We've seen him be an attacking threat. He's gone and done the things that we suspect he's been asked to do. Signal that to the group, signal that to him, and I think it's a great story. And then partnering with Kako and Merritt and probably McGrath at times as well. Day Wicks there too, and we have an opportunity to be a bit more unpredictable with how we set up and how we go forward. We can be okay with a bit more dirty ball, which when you've got a player like Clayton Oliver in the midfield who's going to fight and scrap for every morsel of contested possession, then you probably need to expect to get a little bit more dirty footy. And then I think, it could be a really different shape ahead of the footy and something quite exciting. So, yeah, go. Kako and Wright will do their thing. And they've both been remarkably consistent through this year. Can we give them a little bit more support at ground level and with that more pressure at, when the ball hits the deck is what I'm hoping to see.
The other end, as I said earlier, the Giants have been really efficient when they are going inside 50. They've got quite a wide range of dangerous threats up there and some very familiar ones to us. Obviously, Jake Stringer been a little bit hot and cold this year, but when he's been hot, he certainly has been impactful. Aaron Cadman, he's going from strength to strength as a key forward. And then Toby Green, it's consistently done damage to us on the scoreboard. I think it's the last 6 games in a row, he's kicked at least 2 goals against us. So I guess, are there any matchups there that you think we can exploit, or you'd be really confident in our ability to defend them, or what else should we be looking at doing to limit their scoring?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a really boring, almost bordering on cliche answer here, mate. But I mean, if we think back to the game earlier in the year in round 9, we halfway through the third quarter, the Giants had kicked 6 goals in the game, and 2 of them were from kick-ins where we dropped our guard. We won contests and we'd done a better job at denying uncontested marks. Our pressure was probably the best it had been all season, and it was really only after their midfield took over. You might remember they threw Daniels, Bedford and Green into their midfield mix as fresher legs through the midfield at a time where Sharp, for us, had done his shoulder and gone off. We were a rotation down. They kicked 10 of the last 13 goals and 4 of those came from clearance. So I don't think matchups matter too much. We've got the 2 talls down there to take Cadman and also Brown. We've got the 2 mediums in Pryor and Redmond to take Stringer and Green. Those matchups are going to be more than fine if the ball's coming in under pressure. They're going to get exposed if it's not. So, yeah, I think it's a really boring answer, but I think for us, it just has to be the fundamentals of contest, forward half pressure. And then can we be a bit braver with ball movement as well to not allow them to set up the ground so that when they do win it back, they're winning it back from deeper in our forward line and not sort of in their own forward half.
Yeah. Well, moving on to final thoughts tonight. And given the state of the season, I've been trying to have more fun with these final thoughts. And look, we did movies last week, so I'll switch to the small screen for this final thought. Jono, what TV show best represents Essendon's 2026 season?
Yeah, I'm a big show. I'm a big fan of the show The Bear, and I haven't. I'm looking forward to watching the new season. I've been seeing the ads for it, so that was the first one that came to mind. I get to the end of each episode and I feel completely exhausted from what I've just witnessed. And this year's been a little bit like that. There's some really talented people working in that kitchen, but also some people that you scratch your head at wondering what they're doing there. There's always a lot of chaos. There's always a lot of noise, a lot of yelling. And then weirdly afterwards, as a non-smoker, I want to have a cigarette. So yeah, that I landed on The Bear, mate. What did you come up with?
I didn't think about it myself. I came up with this question immediately before the episode. I didn't have a lot of time to think about it. So I chucked it into ChatGPT and it actually came up with The Bear as an option. So you and ChatGPT coming up with the same ideas and you didn't have to use, 10 litres of water to generate that answer. But the one that most thought fit Essendon season was The Walking Dead with all the calamities and the people falling over and just, a bit of a no end in sight to what's been going on. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty apt one that the old ChatGPT came up with there. Well, look, that will do us for this evening. Bit of a marathon for us, a bit of behind the scenes. We recorded this whole episode and then realised that it hadn't uploaded. So we've that committed. We've gone straight back to the well and just done it again. So yeah, a little bit behind the curtain for you guys. That's how committed we are to making sure you get us in your ears every week. Huge thanks to you, Jono, obviously for all the work you've done this week and for backing up. It the problems were at my end. So I appreciate that you've spent an extra hour and a bit with me to get this done. Again, big thanks to Rick for his time early this week as well. And as I said, we'll sort of go dig a bit deeper into what Rick talked about next week. Any final words from you, Jono?
That good the first time, we decided to do it twice. I do like the fact, mate, that we decided to chop 2 segments out of the episode that we recorded the first time around and have ended up going a minute longer the second time, despite chopping that out. So yeah, apologies to everyone who has had to experience us rabbiting on about things unbeknownst to them, didn't rabbit on about the first time, including right now. Excellent job by Rick and yourself during the week, mate. I'm looking forward to listening to that properly over the weekend and really scribbling down some notes on Rick's comment and keeping my eyes out on some of the talent that's coming through. Thanks again for your work. It's been good fun as always, both the first time and the second time. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting to Marvel on Sunday. And I'm not just saying that. I know we've got a couple of our international Patreon subscribers who just happened to be in Melbourne this week and are coming along to the game. So looking forward to seeing some names I know, but faces that I don't for the first time at the pre-game catch-up, and along with all the regular crew as well. It's always good fun. And then also just looking forward to seeing how our group responds to last week. I think we've been pretty good over the last 2 years, as bad as it's been, backing up after a really poor performance to something that looks better. So let's see how that goes. Jackson Artemis on debut as well. It's always exciting. And I think Isaac Kako looks like he's back and just starting to turn the corner a little bit. So looking forward to seeing him in the flesh as well this week. So yeah, can't wait to get there.
Absolutely. Plenty to look forward to, even in the depths of the season that we're in. Well, again, for the second time tonight, or the first time you guys are hearing, as always, stay safe and go Dons.